Welcome to the Candice Malcolm Show. My name is Kris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Candice is being ever so kind and letting me sit in her chair a little bit this summer. So thank you for making us a part of your day with the show. Lots to talk about. Let's jump in right off the top. So there was a big by-election just to the north of where I am here in Lethbridge, Alberta. It was in Battle River, Crowfoot. And yes, the Conservative Party leader, Pierre Poilievre, is now officially a member of Parliament once again. He was elected with just over 80% support. If we can pull that up, I think we have a screenshot from Elections Canada showing what is more or less the final vote tally from last night. So it was just over 80% in total that Pierre Poilievre captured last night for his riding. For folks who aren't familiar with the riding, this is a huge geographic area, basically just to the east of Calgary, and it runs up against the line and the border of Saskatchewan. Towards the south of the riding, there is Drumheller, which is, of course, the famous place with the big International Dinosaur Museum. They also have a prison there, so there's lots of law enforcement jobs. And up towards the north of the riding, there is Canadian Forces Base CFB Wainwright, which is one of the busiest army bases in Canada, actually. And in between, there's Stettler, so a lot of rodeo folks there. So you kind of get this mix of like Alberta culture all pooling in Battle River Crowfoot. It's been considered a safe seat since time immemorial for whatever happens to be the Conservative brand of party going on. So Pierre Poilievre won with more than 80% of the vote last night. We do have a brief clip for you if we are your news starting the day. Here's Pierre Poilievre, a portion of it from last night.
To anyone who has been knocked down, but has got back up and kept on going, you haven't given up, so I won't give up. Together, we will work together. We will fight together. We will sacrifice together to restore the opportunity that our grandparents left for us so that we can leave it for our grandchildren, so that we can once again restore a country that is strong, self-reliant, and sovereign. That is the country we're in this for. That is why we stay united. That is why we go forward. May God keep our land glorious and free.
So really happy to hear Pierre Poilievre commit to fighting the looming ban on the sale of normal gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles. Mark Carney and his government would refer to it as the EV mandate. I'm worried by just calling it the EV mandate, it kind of slips under the door and people don't realize how important this is. It's actually a ban. The federal government is going to make it illegal for you to be able to go to a car dealership and purchase a gasoline or diesel powered vehicle. Those restrictions start in like 4 months. Okay. As we spoke at length with Dan McTagg yesterday on the Candice Malcolm Show, this is going to start skewing the vehicle market, which people depend upon for everything really when it comes to getting to work and driving to school, etc. Okay. This is going to start skewing the market in about 4 months' time. And by 2035, it's going to be a flat out ban. So it's really important. And we're happy to hear that Poilievre is committing to making it a campaign of his. He even called it that once he gets back into the House of Commons. He's also committed to fighting the industrial carbon tax. So as of right now, we're kind of in a lull when it comes to the federal carbon tax because the consumer carbon tax is gone. It's not actually just reduced to zero. They went in and they excised the actual functionality of the carbon tax. So it is gone. So that is why typically gasoline and diesel is around 20-ish cents cheaper this summer than it was last summer. So that's because tax fighters like you, normal people, actually got somebody like Mark Carney to blink on the consumer carbon tax. But we all know that it's not over. Carney is cooking up a big new industrial carbon tax. They don't have it in place yet. It's going to hit things like fuel refineries, okay? So it's going to make things like gasoline and diesel suddenly cost more. It's going to hit things like utility companies. So if you use natural gas, okay, for your home heating or even your electricity, it's going to affect that. It's going to hit things like fertilizer plants. You know, what else do farmers need right now but an enormous cost increase and pain in the neck, like a big industrial carbon tax, which in turn will make food cost more again. Also, for folks who are watching in Ontario, send an email to Ontario Premier Doug Ford, okay? Because Mark Carney's industrial carbon tax is, in their words, going to decimate the steel industry there, okay? So it's very good to hear Poilievre commit to fighting things like the looming ban on gasoline and diesel powered cars, the industrial carbon tax, and to keep promising to fight the censorship laws. Okay. We've got big censorship laws. They're already in place here in Canada. More of them are on the way. And there's a ton of mainstream media that are on government payroll, which is an enormous conflict of interests because journalists should never be paid by the government. So interesting to see. I'm looking forward to seeing this next season of the House of Commons now that things are getting a little bit more back to normal in the fall. Another thing we're keeping an eye on, especially here in Alberta, is that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith is going to be holding a cabinet meeting today. And usually that would be kind of a nothing burger because we're in the middle of summer and who cares? But taxpayers care. Anybody who cares about government transparency cares. Because, of course, a really strange thing happened a little while ago. August 1st, the Friday before a long weekend, a change was quietly made to the transparency rules when it comes to spending taxpayers' money. A rule that required politicians and bureaucrats, senior government officials, whenever they spend more than $100 of taxpayers' money, up until recently, they had to post that receipt on the internet for everybody to see. You didn't have to go through a paywall. You didn't have to wait for your FOI documents to come through, possibly waiting months for that. Okay? Everybody could see. And it's important to be able to see an itemized receipt because you probably care if somebody is spending your money renting a Corolla or a Corvette, if somebody's spending your money buying a Subway sandwich or a lobster dinner. Those itemized detailed receipts matter. Strangely, that requirement just disappeared on a Friday. So Premier Danielle Smith was away at the time, and she just got back recently from a trade trip to Mexico. When she was asked about it at her Alberta Next panel, she said she was confused by this too, that they were going to be figuring out what happened and, quote, reversing it at their next cabinet meeting. That's today. So we're definitely keeping an eye on that here because taxpayers demand that level of transparency. Speaking of transparency and accountability, you know how we're able to do that? You know how everybody in Canada is able to speak truth to power, as the kids on the left say? You know how everybody is able to keep tabs on their politician, their member of parliament, and speak up when they're screwing up? It's because we have something called free expression and freedom of assembly and association. These are fundamentally important because without them, a chill goes through everybody. And then they start getting scared of people who are in power and who are taking their money. Keep in mind that the taxes we're paying here in Canada are costing the average worker more than the cost of homes, food, and clothing combined. For that amount of money, we better be getting gold-plated services and a very transparent government. How do we hold government to account? Well, Christine Van Geyn is an excellent constitutional lawyer. She knows all about this. Let's find out. Joining me now is the Litigation Director for the Canadian Constitution Foundation, the CCF, Christine Van Geyn. Christine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Kris.
So much to talk about on the freedom angle of things. And I usually like to introduce you to the audience as one of the people who helped get that wonderful ruling coming from the federal court level against the invocation of the Emergencies Act. And was that including, in particular, the freezing of the bank accounts? I think that it was, right?
Yeah. So we've had a legal challenge to Justin Trudeau's invocation of the Emergencies Act in response to the Freedom Convoy in 2022. And we said that invocation was unjustified, that the threshold to invoke that piece of legislation, which is very high, had not been met. And the judge agreed with us. And the judge also agreed with us that the freezing of bank accounts was a unconstitutional search and seizure, and that the prohibitions on gatherings across the country was also an unconstitutional violation of the right to freedom of expression. So a big win in that case, although I'll remind everyone that it is under appeal. So we are still awaiting the outcome of that appeal, which was heard in February.
Wonderful. That was a huge win. I remember feeling kind of a collective shift in what is often referred to loosely as the freedom movement, those who want smaller, more accountable government in this country and not big bossy ones who get to take all of our money and freeze our bank accounts. Because it comes down to this: if you can't gather and if you can't protest and express yourself, you can't hold government to account, which is why the Taxpayers Federation was also opposed to the invocation of the Emergencies Act. And I must say, anecdotally, I've heard from plenty of people who are still scared. They're not even joking. They're still scared of, oh, the government might freeze my bank account if I speak up. Like,
Yeah,
I can't.
we heard a lot of that. We heard so much of that. It was really a really difficult time to be a charity operating in
Yeah.
Canada. And some people still feel this way. I understand it, although I don't think that there is a risk of that at this point. But that's why we need to push back on that kind of government overreach.
Big time, which is why I wanted to get you on today, because I know that you guys are really following particularly what is happening out in Atlantic Canada. If I'm singling out a place, it's going to be Nova Scotia, where they've got a huge ban on what people often refer to as walking in the woods. So not just a campfire ban. I'm from British Columbia. I grew up around wildfires. I know that they're super frightening, but there they'll have certain regions which are closed down at certain times. Or they will say things like, you can't bring a hot ATV in there with a hot exhaust, which can start fires. And obviously, you can't have a campfire, but you can still go walking your dog, or you can go hiking, or you can go fishing. Where I think a lot of people were kind of taken aback by the change in Nova Scotia. Of all of a sudden, it's nobody's allowed in the forest, we think, and it's a $25,000 ban.
Yeah, it's a $25,000 fine or up
Fine,
to
sorry.
$25,000 fine. Although with taxes and victims' fees, there's individuals who have received this fine. I think it amounts to closer to $28,000. So yeah, we think that this is disproportionate. It is going too far. It is banning activities that don't pose risk because the government is kind of playing on this fear and control narrative. It is a lockdown of the forest, and we're really opposed to this kind of thing. Of course, ban fires, ban campfires, ban. I appreciate your comment about ATVs because those do start fires. But the number one cause of wildfires in Nova Scotia, it's actually different from British Columbia. The number one cause is arson, and the most recent fire in Nova Scotia, which I understand is under control, was caused by human activity. That is the main cause of most fires is arson. So punish arsonists. I mean, lay down the law. Put people who intentionally start fires that risk human lives and which destroy property, put those people in jail and give them big penalties. But don't punish someone because they took their dog for a walk in the woods. That's bizarre and it's completely irrational.
We actually have a clip about that in that particular fire. It's Tim Houston, the Premier of Nova Scotia, and a fire official talking about the fire, which is for folks who are in Nova Scotia or who have lived there before. It's an area called Bears Lake. It's typically kind of a big box shopping area just to the south of Halifax. So folks who want to go out and get their Costco fix, etc., will drive down there and do some shopping. Around it and kind of on this low hill is a big forested area. So let's take a listen to that.
I understand that you're not able to say the cause of the Susie Lake fire under investigation. Are there early indications that this would be human caused? I know that that is largely what causes forest fires in this part of the country.
So that the cause of the fire was related to human activity. It was an open fire.
Can you share the specific location of where that open pit fire was found?
I don't have that to share today. No, just we can share that it was human activity, but it's an ongoing investigation, so some of those details I don't have to provide.
Was there a homeless encampment in this area where your crews responded to?
I think, again, sorry, but I think like the investigation in time will look at, the what, the why, the how, all those types of things. But for right now, the focus is just on containing the fire, fighting the fires, and just kind of reiterating to Nova Scotians that it's a risky situation and just obey the laws that are in place right now.
So the scuttlebutt slash rumor going around the area is that there was a homeless encampment in the area, and that is where the fire got started. Speaking from personal experience, I grew up in the Fraser Canyon, Fraser Valley, and especially the last few years before I left British Columbia, homelessness was a major problem because housing was absolutely outrageous, and it was really starting to hurt the working poor. And then you'd wind up with these kind of encampments up logging roads, and there's people who are trying to cook or stay warm, etc. And that's where some fires were starting. We're hearing, Christine, that apparently the government is reluctant to move folks out of the woods, even if they're living there, even if they think it's going to cause a risk of a fire starting. Is this where we're going, where we wind up? Is this called uneven application of the law, or am I using lawyer talk incorrectly there?
Uh, Look, so I think that the idea of giving a $25,000 fine to a homeless person is obviously silly. They
Hmm.
do not have a home. They do not have resources to pay a fine like that. Although I would say few people do. Few
Yeah.
people can afford to pay a fine like this. There has been reporting on CBC that people who work with the homeless community have been going in. They have a permit to enter the woods and trying to explain to people at the encampments why they should leave, why they shouldn't be in the woods. But my understanding is that the proclamation is not being enforced against them. And I don't think it should be, because I don't think it should be enforced against anyone. But I do think that they should not be, lighting fires. I think that
Hmm.
part of it should be enforced, and there should be penalties associated with that. But I do not think that merely being in the woods should be enforced either against the people who are living without a home in the woods, or people who are walking their dogs or foraging for wildflowers, or bird watching or picnicking.
Or any of the other activities that aren't typically known to cause fires. Do you
Punish
think
people who start fires. Completely reasonable.
now that's a lot of crazy talk? Actually punish people who are committing arson and
And
deliberately
and look,
starting fires.
there's all kinds of bizarre hysteria around the idea that people walking in the woods pose some risk, even if they are not doing anything that starts a fire. And so many people I have seen make these claims that, oh, if you're walking in the woods, you might do something else that causes a fire, like dropping a cigarette, or going on an ATV, or burning something. I've even heard the claim multiple times that someone might drop a plastic wrapper or a water bottle, and the light magnifies through this and sparks a fire. I mean, this is really paranoid, hysterical thinking. And it's also this mindset where every person out of their home is a potential criminal and needs to be treated as such by the government. And that is not an appropriate way to govern. That's governing through fear of your own citizens. And it's really wrong and contrary to our most fundamental values.
And it will start quickly down that slippery slope of really restricting people's free expression. I'm not even kidding. Like, at the Taxpayers Federation, you were with the Taxpayers Federation, that we will do some stunts. And so I remember distinctly, I've got like a 30-foot tall balloon man. Okay. He's still in my garage. And like I set him up at different places in order to get attention, and the insurance that you had to get and the permissions that you had to get, because it was all around this. Okay, what if somebody is really distracted by what you're doing? Or what if somebody is really frightened by what you're doing? Like, there was all sorts of like safetyism, to use your language, that was rolling into this. Before we move on to your excellent report on safetyism and how it could be eroding our freedoms in Canada, exactly to what I just said, where do we stand on the Nova Scotia / Atlantic Canada issue? Like, is your group fighting it directly? Are you challenging it in court? Do you guys have dates? How can people help?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So we have filed for a judicial review of the proclamation under the Forest Act that bans people from entering the woods. If you want to support our legal fund, you can visit the ccf.ca/donate, and we will be bringing this as a public interest litigant, which means as an organization, because this is the kind of work that we do at the CCF. We have standing generally to sue on behalf of all people in Nova Scotia.
Excellent. All right. And then one other thing I wanted to touch on here, it's much closer to home here in Alberta. There was the Christian singer person from the United States. I listened to an interview with him on a podcast the other day. I was surprised to hear he said he's been coming up to Canada for like 20 years and doing concerts and doing outreach with his congregation, I would describe it. And so they're going to be having a concert. They're actually holding it on the lawn of the legislature in Alberta, which I found really interesting. Are you following this from kind of a free expression angle and like a safetyism angle as well?
Yeah, actually both, as well as freedom of religion. So
Okay.
Sean Feucht, who's this Christian American worship singer, who sometimes uses language that I would not use, and he says things that I don't agree with, but he also performs worship music, which is a constitutionally protected form of expression and expression of religion. And those are his rights, even in Canada as an American. And it's also the right of people to attend his worship services and listen to his music. And the fact that a lot of municipalities across Canada, mostly in Eastern Canada, either denied or pulled his park permits to perform in parks is really, really unreasonable. I think it was an unjustified use of their discretion, sort of similar to this famous old case called Roncarelli and Duplessis. I've written about this for the Hub. But essentially, that was a case where the Premier of Nova Scotia didn't like the Jehovah's Witnesses at the time. So he pulled the liquor license of a famous restaurant owner in Montreal who was a Jehovah's Witness, essentially to punish him for having a religion that the Premier disagreed with. And that's sort of the same scenario playing out here. There are not really legitimate reasons to pull his permits. A lot of cities have justified it, sort of saying, oh, well, it's a safety issue that we shouldn't have too many people in parks. It's just ridiculous. There are concerts in parks all the time. Quebec City said he was too controversial an artist, which is content-based restrictions on speech and religion, which is inappropriate. Montreal claimed that he needed a permit to perform a worship service inside a church, which of course you don't. It's ordinary use of the church. So it really is targeting on the basis of his content, which you don't need to agree with to think that he has the right to express it. We have a right to freedom of religion, however it expresses itself in this country.
Isn't that the whole point of freedom of expression? I mean, really, if I agree with
Yeah.
everything you're saying, I don't need it written down in some big building somewhere.
Absolutely. Well, your right to freedom of expression only has meaning if you're allowed to express things that other people disagree with. If you're only allowed to express things everyone says are unobjectionable and agree with, the right just is just to be a boring, ordinary person who never causes any controversy whatsoever. The civil rights movement in the United States was possible because of freedom of expression. This is a right for all people, the right to freedom of expression. And it's actually how we define the contours of every other right that we have, whether it's freedom of religion or equality rights or freedom of the press.
I must say, it kind of reminds me of, I forget when it was, but it was recent, when the American commentator Tucker Carlson was coming up to Canada and he was holding a couple of like big speaking events. And there were actual, like, I don't remember if it was an MP or an MLA or both. There were actual like lawmakers who were saying, we should arrest him at the border and not let him in. Like, it was embarrassing, as if, Rachel Maddow were coming up here from MSNBC and that any reasonable person would say we should arrest her and not let her talk about her radical left-wing ideas. Like, who cares? Isn't that the point of free expression? And if your arguments are awesome, it should be able to withstand some free expression and criticism. It reminded me of that.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that Rachel Maddow anyone would say she should be arrested if she came into Canada that would never happen. And look, there's plenty I disagree with Tucker.
Sure.
There's plenty I disagree with about Rachel Maddow.
Same.
And I think that it's useful to have their speech scrutinized, analyzed, and taken apart when it's wrong. That's actually how we counter bad ideas, by allowing them to be considered and rejected. Otherwise, you drive things underground and make martyrs out of people. So that's actually what the CBC did with Sean Feucht. I think the fact that he's been coming here for 20 years and most people had never heard about it, they sure have heard of it now because of CBC trying to have it shut down.
That's a perfect example and test of exactly what we're talking about here. Briefly, I will point out that this even affects the Canadian Taxpayers Federation from time to time, because I remember distinctly a few years ago when Stéphane Guilbeault was still the environment minister, we found a government report, a federal government report, which was recommending a special tax on pickup trucks and SUVs. It was right there in their language. It was right there in the appendices of their report. We had it in black and white. We talked about it. We reported on it, as we would say with the Taxpayers Federation, and he called it disinformation and misinformation as a sitting minister of the Crown. So that's when you're just like, whoa, how long are we going to have to wait until he starts saying that you shouldn't be allowed to say disinformation and misinformation? We get into that kind of online harms language realm, and that's why we have to be able to protect our right for free expression. I wanted to dovetail this, your excellent coverage of this, with you guys have a special report that has been put out on what you refer to as safetyism, and how the state/government is now using safetyism and it could start trampling our rights. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so safetyism refers to a cultural or even institution or government tendency to prioritize physical and even emotional safety above all other values, at the expense of those other values, including freedom, personal development, open debate, and discourse. And look, safety is, of course, important, but Canadian governments have exploited emergencies or the sense of danger historically in the most grotesque ways. They've used it, the rationale of safety, to shut down Sean Feucht, to lock down the forests in Nova Scotia. They've used it to justify censorship, surveillance, or restrictions on basic freedoms, all in the name of protecting people from discomfort or offense or some type of perceived risk or harm. And it's this culture where no risk is tolerable whatsoever. That cellophane wrapper in the woods is apparently so dangerous that you're not allowed to walk your dog in the forest. So in this report, Safety Above All, which you can download for free at the ccf.ca/safetyism, we go through the historic instances where governments have overreached and eroded and violated civil liberties in the name of safety. And they're really disturbing examples, from the invocation of the War Measures Act in response to the October crisis in 1970, where habeas corpus was suspended, where homes were searched without warrants, where people were arrested and detained incommunicado for weeks. There was the detainment of and internment of Japanese Canadians in 1942 following Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. And Japanese Canadians were rounded up across the country and put into shacks in interior BC without adequate heating. Their property was seized by the government and sold, and then that money was used to finance their own internment, because the government told people that Japanese Canadians were too dangerous because of this, inaccurate risk view that they would be spying on Canadians. So they all had to be proactively put into these internment camps. There was the G20 mass arrests. There's the practice of random vehicle stops, where police, in the name of public safety, have the power to pull over any driver on the road. Which is often administered in a way that is racially biased. There was the long gun registry, which was justified in the name of safety and essentially created the risk of paper-based criminalization of lawful gun owners. It was used to justify, to go full circle in this conversation, the Justin Trudeau invocation of the Emergencies Act. So when government says, this is for your own good, you need to be very, very wary of those types of claims, because their goal is often going to operate in a way that really erodes our basic freedoms.
Just to wrap up here, Christine, excellent points. If I can go out on a limb here, as somebody who was born and raised here and who has 2 kids who have gone through the school systems, we've also alternatively homeschooled from time to time. I find that quite often this idea of big daddy government taking care of everything the government says is fine, and it's in order to be safe, okay? That kind of thinking really gets baked in here. And it's different. Like here in Alberta, it's a bit different, but it's really baked in, I found from experience of living in places like Ontario and living in places like Nova Scotia, not to generalize, I know everybody is different, but just generally speaking as a culture. And I think that that does start in the schools, and it starts in kids' books, which is why I'm bringing this up. You wrote a kids' book. I think it's called Maple's Garden, and it's all about the fundamental need for free expression. Up in the United States, they'd call it free speech, but free expression, free speech. Why did you think it was important to help little kids start appreciating a fundamental freedom like this?
So it is so important that children understand the right to freedom of expression at an early age, because it's going to be our children who are the guardians of our civil liberties for the next generation. And I, as a civil liberties lawyer, I watch every day these freedoms get eroded. And I think the courts are not the bulwark against the government overreach that we would like them to be. What we need to do is educate our children and create a culture where civil liberties is valued. And so that's why I wrote this book, Maple's Garden, beautifully illustrated by a Canadian artist who I actually grew up with, who has had her own issues with freedom of expression. As an artist, she drew pictures of the convoy, and she had other artists attack her. And if you can't have free expression as an artist, if you can't explore controversial as an artist, I mean, what is even the point of art if you can't do that? So I was so proud to collaborate with Lisa on this project. Maple's Garden, it's going to be available as of September 2nd, and it's available for pre-order right now.
It's available September 2nd?
Yeah, that's the launch date.
Did you pick Atlas Shrugged Day on purpose, or was that just a coincidence?
It's of course you would know that, Kris. Of all, no, that's a coincidence. But yeah, I should say it's on purpose, but it was a coincidence.
So I love that. For folks who aren't Ayn Rand nuts, Atlas Shrugged Day is typically referred to as September 2nd because that's one of the opening sentences of her book, Atlas Shrugged, which is all about human spirit, individuality, and freedom. Christine, this has just been wonderful. I will tell a tale out of school. When I'm in a long form interview and somebody starts asking me a really complicated legal question about something like free expression, I'll be like, you know who's really smart about that? Christine Van Geyn. Go watch her show. So where can people watch your show?
So I have a few shows. I am a very busy lady. So I have a YouTube channel, which you can find on YouTube by searching the Canadian Constitution Foundation. I have a podcast called Not Reserving Judgment, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, as well as on YouTube. And then I host a national broadcast television program called Canadian Justice, which is available on the News Forum, which is a basic cable channel that if you have cable, you will have in your house.
Wonderful. Christine Van Geyn, Litigation Director for the Canadian Constitution Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us on the Candice Malcolm Show.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Folks, you heard it directly from her. If we don't all band together, so all these alternative news outlets, all of these independent outlets, these advocacy groups like the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, like the Canadian Constitution Foundation, government is just going to get bigger, and government is just going to make you pay for them getting bigger and bigger and telling you to shut up more and more and more. So we got to build this side of the movement. So if you have somebody in your circle who is open to the idea of maybe even just a kid's book, encouraging kids to be able to stand up for themselves, to speak their minds, to talk back to their teachers perhaps, and to stand up for themselves, make sure you share this episode. Make sure you go to the Canadian Constitution Foundation, sign up for free for their emails. I happen to know for a fact you can even watch like a mini course on the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and how it affects us and our Constitution for free on their website. These are from like trained lawyers who wear gowns and robes and stuff. They're really smart. So this is how we grow the movement, okay? And the best way right now to grow the movement is to head on over to Juno News, make sure you subscribe, and make sure you share this episode.